I never thought I'd be in a position like this. My sister, Megan, is the kind of person who's always commanded attention without trying. At 25, she's the golden child of our family. Charming, confident, and just enough trouble to keep people intrigued. I'm 27, quieter, and used to playing the role of the responsible one. For the most part, we've managed to coexist despite our differences. But recently, something has shifted, and now I feel like my entire world is starting to crack. Megan's wedding is 2 weeks away. It's supposed to be the happiest time of her life, but I can't help noticing how she's been acting around my boyfriend, Luke. He's 30, kind, and the type of guy who can make anyone feel at ease. We've been together for 3 years, and until now, I never had a reason to question our relationship or my sister. It started subtly, so much so that I almost missed it. At family dinners, Megan would laugh a little too hard at Luke's jokes, even when they weren't funny. She'd compliment him on things that seemed specific. His haircut, the way he really listens during conversations. Little things that seemed innocent but felt slightly off. I brushed it off at first. Megan's always been a bit of a flirt. It's just her personality, right? She doesn't mean anything by it. At least, that's what I told myself. But then I noticed her finding excuses to touch him. A hand on his arm when she laughed, brushing past him in the kitchen, even sitting next to him every chance she got. Once, during a family brunch, I saw her lean over Luke to grab something from the table, her hand lingering on his shoulder just a second too long. That night, as Luke and I were driving home, I brought it up. "Did you notice how Megan was acting today?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He glanced at me, confused. "What do you mean? You didn't think she was, I don't know, overly friendly?" I said, hesitating. Luke shook his head, smiling faintly. "Megan's always like that. She's just outgoing. I think you're reading too much into it." His answer didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to push it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I should let it go. But as the days passed, I couldn't. The next time we were all together, Megan's behavior became even more obvious. She kept pulling Luke into conversations about her wedding, asking for his opinions on the venue and music. At one point, she handed him her phone, asking him to scroll through a list of flower arrangements. I was sitting right there, but she barely acknowledged me. That night, I couldn't hold back. "You really don't see it?" I asked Luke as we got ready for bed. "See what?" he said, clearly tired of the topic. "She's flirting with you," I said bluntly. Luke sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Emily, she's your sister. She's not flirting with me. She's just excited about her wedding and probably doesn't realize how she's coming across. She's sitting in your lap, practically." I shot back, my frustration bubbling over. He frowned, shaking his head. "You're overthinking this. Megan's always been touchy-feely. It doesn't mean anything." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. The final straw came during a barbecue at my parents' house. I'd stepped inside to grab something from the fridge, and when I came back out, I saw Megan and Luke standing in the corner of the yard, talking quietly. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm, and they were standing closer than they needed to. I froze for a moment, watching them. Neither of them noticed me right away, and when Megan finally glanced my way, she quickly stepped back, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady as I approached. Megan smiled brightly, too brightly. "Oh, nothing. Luke was just telling me about his work trip next month. It sounds so interesting." Luke nodded, his expression neutral, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't confront them then. I didn't want to make a scene at a family gathering. But that night, as soon as we got home, I turned to Luke. "I need you to be honest with me," I said, my voice trembling. "Is there something going on between you and Megan?" His eyes widened in shock. "What? No, of course not. Then why is she always hanging all over you? Why do I keep catching you two in these moments?" "Emily, there's nothing going on," he said firmly. "I don't know why you're so worked up about this, but Megan is your sister. She wouldn't do something like that." "And you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Would you?" His expression softened, and he reached for my hand. "I love you," There's nothing between me and Megan, I swear. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, the doubt was still there, gnawing at me. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the tension. I kept replaying that moment at the barbecue in my head, analyzing every detail. How close they were standing, the way Megan laughed, the awkward shift in their behavior when they saw me. I wanted to trust Luke, to believe that he was being truthful, but my instincts told me something wasn't right. Megan hadn't reached out since that day, which was unusual for her. Normally, she'd be texting me nonstop with wedding updates, asking for advice on decorations, or just venting about random things. Now, there was radio silence. Part of me was relieved not to deal with her, but another part of me couldn't help but feel suspicious. Luke, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. He went about his days as if nothing had happened, which only made me feel more alone. Every time I tried to bring up Megan, he'd wave it off or say something like, "You're still stuck on this? I told you, there's nothing going on." One evening, after yet another unresolved conversation, I decided I needed answers. If Luke wasn't going to see my side of things, maybe Megan would. I called her, and to my surprise, she picked up after just a couple of rings. "Hey, Em," she chirped, her voice unusually cheerful. "What's up?" Her tone threw me off. It was as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't spent the last few weeks acting completely inappropriately around my boyfriend. "I think we need to talk," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Sure," she said, still chipper. "What's going on?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to start. "It's about Luke," I finally said. "I've noticed the way you've been acting around him, and it's making me uncomfortable." There was a pause, and then she laughed. "Emily, are you serious? I'm not acting any way around Luke. He's your boyfriend. Why would I ever be interested in him?" Her casual dismissal sent a wave of anger through me. "I've seen how you are with him, Megan. The laughing, the touching, the constant excuses to talk to him. You're crossing boundaries, and it's not okay." "Boundaries?" she repeated, her voice dripping with mockery. "Emily, come on. You're being ridiculous. Luke and I are just being friendly. Maybe you should ask yourself why you're so insecure." There it was, her signature move. Whenever Megan was called out on anything, she'd find a way to flip it back onto the other person, making them feel like they were the problem. I'd seen her do it to friends, to our parents, even to ex-boyfriends. And now she was doing it to me. "This isn't about insecurity," I said firmly. "This is about respect. You're my sister. You should know better." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her expression, or maybe I just wanted to see it. But then she shrugged. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. If you can't handle me joking around with Luke, that's on you, not me." I clenched my jaw, fighting back the urge to scream. "It's not a joke, Megan. And if you don't stop, I don't know how I'm supposed to move forward with this." "Move forward with what?" she snapped, her cheerful tone vanishing. "Emily, I'm getting married in 2 weeks. I don't have time for your drama. If you want to sulk, that's fine, but don't drag me into it." With that, she hung up, leaving me holding the phone and staring into the empty silence. When I told Luke about the conversation later, he sighed heavily, as if he was tired of hearing about it. "Emily, I think you need to let this go," he said. "Megan's your sister. She loves you. She's not trying to hurt you." I wanted to scream at him for being so blind, for not understanding how deeply this was affecting me. But instead, I just turned away, feeling more alone than ever. The next day, I decided to visit my parents. I thought maybe they could help mediate, or at least give me some perspective. But as soon as I brought up the situation with Megan, I realized I'd made a mistake. "Emily, she's your sister," my mom said, her tone already dismissive. "She's under so much stress with the wedding. Can't you just let it go?" "Let it go?" I repeated, stunned. "She's been flirting with my boyfriend, Mom. How am I supposed to let that go?" "She's not flirting," my dad chimed in, shaking his head. "Megan's just outgoing. You know how she is." "No," I said firmly. "This isn't about her being outgoing. This is about her crossing a line, and none of you seem to care." My mom sighed, rubbing her temples. "Emily, I think you're overreacting. You've always been a little sensitive when it comes to Megan. Maybe you're reading into things that aren't really there. That was the breaking point for me. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not imagining this, I said, my voice trembling with anger. But clearly, none of you are willing to see what's right in front of you. I left before they could say anything else, tears stinging my eyes as I walked to my car. Once again, I felt completely alone, like no one in my family cared about what I was going through. When I got home, Luke was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I walked in and frowned. What happened? I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. Emily, he said, standing up, talk to me. I don't think I can do this anymore, I said quietly. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice filled with confusion. I mean us, I said, finally looking at him. I feel like I'm losing my mind, Luke. You keep telling me there's nothing going on, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm the only one fighting to keep this together. That's not fair, he said, his tone defensive. I've told you the truth over and over. I don't know what else you want from me. I want you to see it from my perspective, I said, my voice breaking. I want you to understand how much this is hurting me. He didn't respond right away, and the silence between us felt heavy, suffocating. Finally, he said, I don't know what you want me to do, Emily. I can't change how you feel, but I'm telling you, there's nothing between me and Megan. I didn't know what to say. For the first time, I realized that no matter how many conversations we had, we were never going to see this the same way. The days following that argument were some of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. Luke and I barely spoke, even when we were in the same room. It was like there was this invisible wall between us, one neither of us could, or maybe wouldn't, tear down. Megan still hadn't reached out, and every time my mom called, it ended with her telling me I needed to fix things before the wedding. I was emotionally drained. I started doubting myself in a way I never had before. Was I really overreacting? Had I misread everything? But then I'd replay those moments in my mind. The too long touches, the whispered conversations, the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching, and the pit in my stomach would return. 3 days before the wedding, I decided to stop by my parents' house. I'd left a few things there from a previous visit, and honestly, I needed to clear my head. When I arrived, the house was quiet, which was unusual. Normally, my parents would be bustling around, especially with the wedding so close. As I stepped inside, I heard muffled voices coming from the backyard. My stomach tightened. I couldn't explain it, but something told me to stay quiet. I walked to the back door and peeked through the window, my heart pounding. There they were, Megan and Luke, standing close together near the garden. At first, I thought they were just talking, but then I saw her place a hand on his chest, her fingers lightly brushing against his shirt. He didn't move away. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language spoke volumes. Megan leaned in closer, her face just inches from his, and then it happened. She kissed him. It wasn't a quick, innocent peck. It was deliberate, intimate, and the worst part? He kissed her back. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My mind screamed at me to look away, to walk out and pretend I hadn't seen it, but my body refused to move. Finally, I pushed the door open, the sound startling them both. They jumped apart like teenagers caught sneaking around, their faces a mix of guilt and panic. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. Megan opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Luke looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Emily, don't. I cut him off, my voice rising. Don't you dare try to explain this away. Megan finally found her voice. Emily, it's not what it looks like, she said, her tone pleading. I laughed bitterly. Not what it looks like. I just saw you kissing my boyfriend, Megan. What exactly am I supposed to think? She stepped toward me, her hands outstretched like she could somehow calm me down. It was a mistake, she said quickly. I don't know what I was thinking. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice breaking. I turned to Luke, who hadn't said a word since I walked outside. What about you? Did it mean anything to you? He looked at me, his eyes full of something that might have been regret. Emily, I swear, I never meant for this to happen. That's not an answer, I said, my voice trembling. Why, Luke? Why would you do this to me? He took a step closer, but I backed away. I don't know, he said softly. I held up a hand, cutting him off. Don't, I said, tears streaming down my face. Just don't. The weight of what I just witnessed hit me all at once, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Without another word, I turned and walked back into the house. I grabbed my things as quickly as I could, ignoring their voices calling after me, and left. As I drove away, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed incessantly, Megan, Luke, even my mom. I couldn't bring myself to answer. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. My mind was racing, but at the same time, I felt completely numb. How could they do this to me? My sister, my boyfriend, two people I trusted more than anyone. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or my cousin Rachel, but I couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. Instead, I sat there in silence, letting the reality of their betrayal sink in. The next morning, after a night of barely any sleep, I made a decision. Megan's fiancé, Ryan, deserved to know the truth. I didn't want to be the one to destroy his happiness, but he had a right to know who he was about to marry. I found his number and stared at my phone for a long time before finally pressing call. When he answered, his voice was warm and unsuspecting. Hey, Emily. What's up? My throat tightened, but I forced myself to speak. Ryan, I need to tell you something. It's about Megan. His tone shifted immediately. What is it? I took a deep breath and told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it or leave anything out. When I finished, there was a long silence. Ryan? I said hesitantly. I don't even know what to say, he finally replied, his voice strained. Are you sure? I wouldn't tell you this if I wasn't, I said. I'm so sorry, Ryan. He sighed heavily. No, I'm glad you told me. I need some time to process this. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Take all the time you need. After we hung up, I felt a small sense of relief. It didn't make the pain go away, but at least I'd done the right thing. Ryan deserved the truth, even if it hurt. Now all I could do was wait and see what would happen next. The morning after I told Ryan, I woke up to a series of missed calls and texts from my mom. It didn't take long to figure out why. Megan must have told her everything, or at least her version of it, because the first voicemail started with, Emily, what the hell were you thinking? I didn't even bother listening to the rest. I knew how it would go. Guilt-tripping, defensiveness, and probably some twisted logic about how Megan was the real victim here. My mom had always been blind to her faults, quick to excuse her behavior no matter how bad it got. I didn't want to deal with it, so I ignored the calls and threw my phone onto the couch. But as the day went on, the weight of everything became harder to bear. I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan. What would he do? Would he confront Megan? Cancel the wedding? Or worse, would he forgive her and go through with it anyway? By the afternoon, I was spiraling. I needed to get out of my apartment to clear my head. I grabbed my keys and drove aimlessly for a while, ending up at a quiet park I used to visit when I needed to think. I sat on a bench, watching the ducks glide across the pond, trying to make sense of everything. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I forced myself to look. It was a text from Ryan. Thank you for telling me. I confronted her. She admitted it. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I appreciate your honesty. I stared at the screen, a mix of relief and guilt washing over me. At least he knew the truth now, but I hated that it had come to this. Megan had brought it on herself, but it didn't make the fallout any easier to handle. That evening, I got another call, this time from my cousin Rachel. She's one of the few people in my family who's always been honest with me, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear. I just talked to your mom, she said as soon as I answered. She's losing it, Emily. She's blaming you for everything. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Of course she is. She said you're trying to ruin Megan's life, Rachel continued. But honestly, good for you. Someone needed to call her out on her bullshit. Hearing that felt like a lifeline. Thank you, I said, my voice cracking. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. Rachel paused for a moment, then said, How are you holding up? I hesitated. I don't know. I feel numb, I guess. Like I'm just waiting for the next thing to fall apart. Well, for what it's worth, you did the right thing, she said firmly. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. We talked for a while longer, and by the time I hung up, I felt a little stronger. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't completely alone in this. The next day, I got an unexpected text from Luke. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, torn between wanting closure and not wanting to see him ever again. Finally, I typed out a single word, fine. We agreed to meet at a cafe near my apartment. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a coffee in front of him. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much since I'd last seen him. Emily, he said when I sat down, his voice soft and hesitant. I didn't respond. I just folded my arms and waited for him to say whatever it was he needed to say. I'm sorry, he began, for everything. I know I screwed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that in person. His words didn't hit me the way I thought they would. Instead of anger or sadness, I felt empty. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice steady. He looked down at his coffee, his hands fidgeting with the cup. I don't know, he admitted. I guess I was flattered. Megan's always had this way of making people feel special, and I got caught up in it. But it was stupid, Emily. It was the biggest mistake I've ever made. I stared at him, searching his face for some sign of sincerity. Do you love her? His head snapped up, and his eyes widened. No. God, no. It wasn't about that. It didn't mean anything. I let out a bitter laugh. It didn't mean anything? You kissed my sister, Luke. Do you even understand how messed up that is? I do, he said quickly, and I hate myself for it. I hate that I hurt you. You didn't deserve this. I shook my head, my throat tightening. You're right. I didn't. And you don't get to come here and act like saying sorry is enough to fix it. I know, he said quietly. I needed you to know that I regret it, that I wish I could take it back. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I'd felt. But another part of me just wanted to leave and never look back. After a long silence, I finally stood up. I can't do this, Luke. Whatever you're looking for from me, I can't give it to you. He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I understand. Without another word, I walked out of the cafe, leaving him behind. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. But at least now, I could start figuring out how to move forward. A few days after my meeting with Luke, the fallout from everything began to hit full force. Ryan had officially called off the wedding. I heard about it through my cousin Rachel, who had been keeping me updated on the chaos happening within the family. According to Rachel, Ryan confronted Megan in front of my parents. He told her he couldn't marry someone who would betray her own sister and that he needed time to figure out what to do next. Megan begged him to reconsider, claiming it was a one-time mistake and that it didn't mean anything. But Ryan wasn't having it. He packed his things and moved out of their shared apartment that same night. When my mom called to yell at me about the mess I'd created, I didn't even try to defend myself. What was the point? She was so blinded by her loyalty to Megan that nothing I said would change her mind. This could have been handled privately, Emily, she snapped during one of her tirades. You didn't have to go running to Ryan. Now you've embarrassed Megan in front of everyone. I let her vent, waiting for her to run out of steam before calmly saying, I told him the truth because he deserved to know. If Megan didn't want to be embarrassed, maybe she shouldn't have done what she did. That shut her up for about 5 seconds before she launched into another round of guilt tripping. Eventually, I hung up, cutting the call short. I didn't have the energy to keep arguing. In the meantime, Megan still hadn't reached out to me. I wasn't sure if it was out of shame, anger, or both, but the silence was deafening. I wanted to say I didn't care, but deep down, it hurt more than I wanted to admit. She was my sister, and as much as I hated what she'd done, part of me still missed her. One evening, Rachel called again, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. You are not going to believe what happened at Aunt Linda's dinner last night, she said. What now? I asked, bracing myself for whatever drama Megan had stirred up this time. Your mom and Megan showed up, and it was awkward, to say the least, Rachel began. Everyone was trying to act normal, but you could feel the tension in the room. And then Uncle Tom asked Megan how the wedding plans were going. I winced. Oh no. Oh yes, Rachel said, practically cackling. Megan just froze. She didn't know what to say. Your mom jumped in and tried to cover for her, saying the wedding was postponed because of scheduling conflicts. But you could tell no one was buying it. I shook my head, a mixture of pity and exasperation bubbling up inside me. Sounds like a disaster. That's putting it lightly, Rachel said. Megan looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. And honestly, good. She deserves to feel some of that discomfort after everything she's done. Rachel's words made me pause. As much as I agreed with her, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Megan had messed up, badly. But seeing her fall apart like this didn't bring me any satisfaction. If anything, it just made me feel tired. Over the next few weeks, the chaos began to settle. Ryan moved on, Megan stayed at my parents' house, and Luke stopped trying to contact me altogether. It was as if everyone was retreating to their corners, licking their wounds. One afternoon, out of the blue, I got an email from Megan. The subject line was blank, and the message was short. I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I regret what I did. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading her words over and over. It was the first time she'd acknowledged what happened, but something about it felt hollow. There was no depth, no real accountability, just a vague apology meant to ease her conscience. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I threw myself into work, picked up a new hobby, painting, and started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my relationship with Luke. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. Rachel stayed in my corner through it all, checking in on me regularly and reminding me that I wasn't alone. You did what you had to do, Em, she said one night over drinks. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself. Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd let myself believe that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for what was right. But now, I realize that sometimes, you have to let things fall apart to rebuild something stronger. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with Megan or my parents. Maybe one day, we'd find a way to move forward. Or maybe this was the beginning of a permanent fracture. Either way, I was done carrying the weight of their expectations. For the first time in years, I felt free. And that, I realized, was worth all the pain it took to get here. Weeks turned into months, and the distance between me and my family grew. Megan stayed silent after her brief apology, and my parents avoided bringing up the situation whenever we spoke. I could feel the strain in every conversation, a heavy, unspoken tension hanging between us. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. You're not going to believe what just happened. Megan showed up at Ryan's place. Call me. My stomach dropped. I dialed her immediately, my heart racing as I tried to imagine what Megan was thinking. Rachel picked up on the first ring. So, she started, clearly buzzing with second-hand adrenaline. Megan went to Ryan's apartment tonight. She begged him to give her another chance. I sank onto the edge of my bed. What did he say? He said no, Rachel said flatly. Apparently, he told her he's moved on and that what she did wasn't something he could ever get past. Megan left in tears. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to say, good. She deserves to face the consequences. But another part of me, a softer, sadder part, felt sorry for her. She'd built her entire identity around being loved, admired, and desired. Now, for the first time, she was facing rejection she couldn't charm her way out of. That's rough, I finally said. Rachel sighed. Yeah, I know she's your sister, but honestly, Em, she brought this on herself. Maybe this will finally be the wake-up call she needs. Maybe, I said, though I wasn't convinced. Megan had spent her whole life avoiding accountability, and I wasn't sure one rejection, even from someone like Ryan, would change that. The next day, I got another surprise. Megan called me. I stared at her name flashing on my screen, debating whether to answer. Eventually, I took a deep breath and picked up. "Emily," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" "What do you want, Megan?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I need to say this in person," she said. "Please, can we meet?" I hesitated. The thought of seeing her again after everything made my chest tighten, but curiosity got the better of me. "Fine," I said. "Tomorrow, noon, the cafe on 6th Street. When I arrived the next day, Megan was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup. She looked different, tired, her usual air of confidence replaced with something more fragile. "Hi," she said as I sat down. "Hi," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Megan took a deep breath and said, "I messed up. I know I did. And I know sorry doesn't fix it, but I am sorry, Emily, for everything." I studied her face, searching for any sign of insincerity. She looked genuinely remorseful, but I'd been burned by her apologies before. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you saying this now, after all this time?" Her eyes dropped to the table. "Because I lost everything," she admitted. "Ryan, you, the family. Even Luke doesn't talk to me anymore. And for what? A stupid, selfish moment." I didn't say anything, letting her words hang in the air. "I've been so angry at you," she continued, her voice trembling, "for telling Ryan, for ruining my wedding, for everything. But the truth is, I ruined it myself. You were just the only one brave enough to call me out." Her admission caught me off guard. I'd spent so long imagining this moment, picturing all the things I'd say to her if she ever took responsibility. But now that it was happening, I didn't know how to respond. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I finally said, my voice quieter than I intended. "What you did, it broke something, Megan. Not just between us, but in me. You were my sister. I trusted you. And you threw that away like it didn't matter." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I know," she said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. I hope someday we can fix this, even if it's not today." I nodded slowly, unsure of what else to say. "Maybe," I said, "but it's going to take time." She nodded back, wiping her eyes quickly. "I understand." We sat in silence for a moment before I stood up. "Take care of yourself, Megan," I said. "You too," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. Things weren't fixed, but for the first time in months, I felt like they could be. It wasn't a clean ending, but maybe that was okay. Life isn't about perfect resolutions. It's about taking the broken pieces and figuring out how to live with them, or without them. For now, I was choosing to move forward, one step at a time.